Hello everybody, I'm Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where every episode I discuss a new topic of workplace culture and provide some insights and some practical things for you to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe and to share with people who you may think would be interested. Okay, let's get on with today's episode. Hello everybody, it's Colin here. Welcome to another episode of the Culture and Coffee podcast. Now, if for those of you who are really interested and really hoping for some, kind of elaborate coffee in some weird and wonderful place, sorry, you're going to be disappointed. I'm in a hotel room in Zurich, Switzerland, and I had big plans. I found a nice coffee shop. I was going to go out and get a nice coffee and either record the podcast there or bring the coffee back to my hotel room. But I've just got too much to do. So I've got a hotel instant coffee. And actually, it's not too bad, I have to say. Sometimes you get instant coffee and it's horrible. This is actually not too bad. I need it for the jet lag, so I'm not fussy at the minute. So in Zurich to work with my business partner, Danny, we're presenting on culture in football. And today's topic around culture and strategy is as relevant to this group of people as it is to everybody else. Because there has to be a connection between the two. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about strategy, what it is. It might sound obvious, but not everybody understands what strategy is. And also the linkage to culture and kind of some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to the two. Now, for many, you're kind of tired of hearing the culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, it's a very old, it's like 25 years old now, Peter Drucker quote, who was talking to Mark Fields, who was then the CEO of Ford Motor Company. And essentially what he was basically saying was that, you've got to pay attention to the culture. The strategy is why we do things, but the culture is the how. Yeah, still, there are some people who still don't really get that. And I feel that the amount of time and money spent on developing strategy is never, ever questioned. Now, often you don't pay consultants to help you with strategy. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you want that external expertise and there's a cost for that. When I was a senior manager, we would pay anything up to probably $100,000. At times to get help with a 3 to 5 year strategy. And we saw that as really, really important to do. And yet, if you suggested to a company that they spend $100,000 minimum on culture, they would be like, no, we're not doing that. So we spend a disproportionate amount of time and money on strategy as compared to culture. And of course, you need the culture to actually deliver the strategy. Now, strategy, what is strategy? So strategy is kind of a process of creating a set of well-defined activities with the aim of achieving a vision. And the vision might be how do you stand out within your competition, within your landscape? How do you achieve a certain level of success? Kind of what's that sense of aspiration? Now, the vision needs to exist first. And I don't mean the goals. People confuse goals with vision. So vision might be, to build to build a successful, sustainable organization that adds back to the community, something along those lines, all right? That's your vision. So then the strategy really defines at a kind of objective and sometimes at a task level, well, what are those things that we need to do? What are those things that we need to invest in order to generate success, in order to generate sustainability, in order to give back to the community? So the vision, that sense of aspiration has to exist first. That's your North Star. And for those of you who heard the podcast that I did on vision, the vision has to be short, it has to be memorable, and it has to be achievable in order to be believable. Your strategy is not just one thing. If it's one thing, then you're probably going to go out of business pretty quickly. Also, strategy is not a set and forget activity. I think people often fall into that trap. It's like, oh, we've written the strategy, now let's do something else. The strategy, you want to probably review the strategy every 3 to 6 months. Definitely you want to review the kind of priorities that you have within the business every 3 months. You know, those quarterly business reviews are crucially important. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are. But you want to take a look at the strategy and say, you know, are we on track to achieve the goals and achieve the vision? Now, the goals kind of come at the end of the strategy because they talk about, well, how will we measure that we've actually delivered the strategy? And there's no perfect strategy. In the same way, there's no perfect vision, right? The vision is your North Star. You write your strategy to deliver to the vision, and the goals are how you measure that you've achieved your strategy. And then what you do is you kind of look at the way you're structured and you say, we need this structure to deliver this strategy. And that structure is often called an operating model. In most businesses, it's called an operating model. And we look at how we're structured. We look at how we interact with our stakeholders. We often look at the methods, the processes, the technology that we use, right? Although some elements of that are part of the culture. So you've got the vision, you've got the strategy, you've got the goals that measure that we deliver the strategy, you've got the operating model, which talks about the structure of the organization. What do we think is the best structure? So talking to the football community here in Zurich, the structure may be that you have an owner, you have a chief executive officer, and then you have a and the chief executive officer is part of the board, and then you might have a sporting director. And the sporting director is really the person that oversees all football activities. In a business, this might be the chief operating officer, for example, or it might be the CEO themselves. And in football, then the sporting director will have responsibility for transfers, will have responsibility for hiring people. Will have responsibility for hiring the manager, but will have responsibility for really making sure there's an investment in culture. So in business terms, this is usually the CEO's responsibility. And as part of the operating model, they'll hire a head of people and culture, they'll have a head of HR and say, okay, it's your job to oversee cultural development, because we recognize that if we don't actually take the time to build and define a culture, then it's going to be almost impossible to deliver the strategy. We think that the operating model, so the hierarchy, this person reports to this person and this group of people reports to this person, we think the operating model is the culture, and it's not. The operating model really just sets roles and responsibilities. It just sets decision making. It probably is used for pay and benefits, especially in government agencies. They have all of these different bandings, and that operating model is really important so everybody knows where they fit in. But defining the culture is something else. And so what you want to make sure is that you spend an equal amount of time developing the culture as you have developing the strategy. So you need to be, the culture needs to understand what the vision is, but then, because the vision, it influences everything. Yeah, it influences the strategy, but it also influences the culture. But then we actually take the time to really understand, well, okay, if that's our vision and that's what we're aiming for, what kind of company do we need to be? And this is the role of values. So values are a set of emotional principles. They talk to the kind of interactions expected by humans such that the organization can achieve its vision. And values are statements, they're not single words. These value statements are specific to the organization, specific to the club, whatever kind of business you have, such that when you involve staff in the creation of that, and it's really important that you do, I'll come back to that in a second, they can see the connection between, yes, if we define how we live these values, then if we work together, we'll achieve the vision. If we uphold these values, we will achieve the vision. So it's crucially important that we involve staff because it's the culture. So leadership teams can provide staff with the vision, Because really it's their responsibility to set the vision. That's what they're paid for. They're paid for. You define the aspiration that we have. You bring the right people together to write the strategy. So senior leaders are accountable for the strategy. So yeah, they have ultimate responsibility. But what they need to do is make sure that they bring the right people together, diverse in their thinking, who can challenge some of the things that, some of the biases that we may have, but also who can help us to course correct if we need to. So that's the way strategy works. But for culture, it belongs to everyone within the organization. And so this is, heads of people and culture, heads of HR really do need to think about, okay, well, how do we do this? So if you've got a massive organization, so I was speaking to a sporting director of a football club yesterday, and their organization, I think, is 350 people. He said, so we would bring 350 people together to define the values. I was like, well, no. What you would do is you would create a subset of the 350 people. So I think he said he had something like 12 departments. I was like, so we'd probably take 3 people from each department. 36, 35 to 40 people. That's a good number to help us define the values. Right, and the values work to get to the point where you define your values. It takes me about half a day, right? It's a very specific exercise, and this is the thing about defining culture. You've got to do it in the right way, otherwise people disengage from it straight away. And you've got to make sure that they feel like they've contributed. This concept of belonging won't exist. People won't feel that they belong to a culture if they have no say in it. So this is something I've been talking about for quite a few years. But I'm really hoping the penny's starting to drop for those who are listening to this, is that if you don't involve people in defining the culture, they'll never feel that they own it. They'll never take responsibility for it. And this is when organizations start putting values on the walls to remind people of them. It's like, well, actually, if people feel a sense of responsibility and a sense of belonging to the culture, you never have to do that. You never have to do that. So that's for the values, is, you bring a subset of people together to help to define the values. And then you can either run for me, it takes 2 days. You can run a 2-day culture workshop with each department. So in that example I just gave, you'd run 2 days with each of the 12 departments to help them to define the behaviors, the principles of collaboration, to help them build relationships, to help understand each other, to generate empathy and compassion, but also talk about how they are going to make sure that they stay disciplined, that they have good attitude, to make sure that they hit their targets as part of the strategy. So you can either do it that way, where you run a culture workshop for each of the 12, and I've done both of these different ways with organizations. I think sometimes if you've got if your culture is nowhere near where it needs to be, you would probably take that approach and you would reset the culture in each of those areas. Does that cost a lot of money? Well, of course, it's not going to be cheap, but do you get the returns? Absolutely, you get the returns. Like in the first 3 months, you'll get the returns, because all of a sudden people are like, ooh, this is ours. We own it. Ooh, we want to safeguard it. We want to make sure we're doing the right things. They start to hold each other to account. It's a beautiful thing. It's like a watch. Like, yes, you can look at the face and it will show you the engagement score, but behind you've got all of these moving parts, all working together, all interlocking, all moving at different speeds, but ultimately they're all working together to tell the time. Okay, and that's the beauty of defining the culture. Yes, it's a big investment up front, but you get the payback like easily within the first year. One organization, their engagement improved 30% in 3 months. 30% increased productivity. So they had enhanced levels of customer service. The feedback was way better. They were able to get through more jobs because one of the things they agreed is they'd focus on doing less better. They agreed that they would stop following some of the dumb cultural norms that they had within their team. So you get all of these gains, and we talk about, well, what are our goals and how are we going to measure it and how are we going to achieve it? So that's one way of doing it, where you bring each of the 12 together for 2 days to define the culture. Or the other approach, again, which is something I do, is you teach your managers how to build great culture. And then you put the onus on them to go back and do it with each of their own teams. And so for a company of over 300 people, what you would end up doing is running probably 4 or 5 management programs. So you want, the optimum amount is really about 30 to 40 people, because what you get then is you mix the groups up. You get this really good, because you want this accountability. So we create little groups. What you want is to teach them all the same things at the same time. So they all have the same knowledge about culture, and we're talking about the basics. And this is not a leadership program, it's a management program. But if you want a really, really great culture to deliver to your strategy, everybody needs to be taught the same thing in the same way to make sure that you don't end up with silos, because silos will actively work against each other, and consequently, you never, ever deliver the strategy. So they're the 2 ways of defining culture. And then you measure your managers on the culture that they create. You don't measure them on the results, right? You measure them on the culture, because if you get the culture right, you get the results by default. Still, some people struggle with this, right? If you take the time to build a really great team, that team over time will start to perform really, really well. And the football analogy that Danny and I are using in our FIFA workshop is Manchester City. It'd be very easy to say, oh, they've got the most money, but actually other clubs have spent just as much and they're nowhere near as successful. It'd be very easy to say, oh, it's always down to Pep Guardiola. It's not. All of the players have got a responsibility. There's a documentary about Manchester City, and you see each of these players standing up and taking responsibility for their culture. The culture comes down to the chefs, the people who cut the grass, the medical team, the people who do ticket sales, the stewards in the ground. They're all a reflection of that Manchester City culture, to use them as an example. And every organisation is no different. The concepts of culture are the same in every organisation. And the sooner organisations realise this, the sooner they'll create a very clear, coherent pathway that employees can see and navigate as a way to deliver culture. As a way to deliver the strategy. And by taking the time to really define the culture, you build something that people really want to be a part of. And at that point, people really care. We call it engagement, but they really care. They care about themselves. They care about their jobs. They care about themselves. They care about their teammates. They care about the vision. They care about the values, because they've had a hand in creating it. So why wouldn't you? But if you don't take the time to build your culture, if you don't take the time to define it, you're just going to be stagnant. People are just going to do whatever they want. If you involve people in everything all of the time, but you don't make any tough decisions, if you don't train your managers on how to actually build culture, you're just going to have a pleasant culture. It's really nice. You're saying all the right things, but you haven't got the determination or the knowledge to actually, kind of do anything different. If leaders want to define the culture and tell staff what it is, and if they have a set of values that aren't values, then you're going to get this combatant culture where people are constantly fighting with each other because there's really no sense of togetherness. People have low emotional intelligence. Whereas if you put time, money, thought, effort, training your capable people on how to build great culture and then positively evolve it in line with the strategy and how that evolves, that, my friends, is the secret sauce to how culture delivers strategy. Hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Ta-ra for now. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com.